Mike Stringer. I served as a part of the first group going into Kenya from December 1964 through 1967, extended for a year. I taught secondary school, 35 kids in a school that now has 600 kids residing in it. So I feel it was worth the effort, and it was a great experience.
Hello, my name is Alan Gerber. I served in the Peace Corps in Kenya, East Africa, from 1965 to 1967. I worked at the Okalau Salient, which was headquartered in Okalau, Kenya, which was midway between the Rift Valley and the Highlands. One of my jobs for a period of time was to handle the hogs on this large-scale cooperative farm. And one of the things I learned that it's very, very difficult to keep track of the pigs because when somebody had a wedding or any kind of celebration, there was always a roasted hog. And when I would go to these celebrations, I knew exactly where that roasted hog came from. And it was always a kind of everybody sort of laughed about it, but it was really hard to keep the hogs where they were. So eventually we got out of that business with the Peace Corps.
Well, I'm Peter Blue in Santa Fe now, but 68 I left New Mexico to go to Kenya. Did my 2 years, had a wonderful time. What I notice, and I think is worth recording, is Peace Corps channels us for the rest of our lives. I notice the irrigation projects that have developed in Kenya are the ones the Peace Corps had me assigned to in '68 to kick off. The wells that I drilled to maintain at the border stations with Somalia are the sites that 100,000 refugees are living off that water now. So the Peace Corps influence extends way beyond what we think 40 years ago when we were over there. People are still benefiting.
My name's Tony Barclay, and I served as an education volunteer, a secondary school teacher in Kenya from January of 1968 till the end of 1970. So I extended for a third year, probably one of the best decisions I ever made. And I was teaching at Kapsabet High School in the Rift Valley province of Kenya. I have a lot of memories, and I'm able to keep them fresh because I've been extraordinarily lucky. I've been back to Kenya every year since 1968 except for 2, through professional reasons and seeing friends, and a lot of the time I've been back near my site and visiting with the families of students whom I taught back in the 1960s. I was able to help several of them get to the United States on scholarships, and they've gone back to Kenya to lead really important professional lives with things we're all proud of. And I was very touched last year when I was in Nairobi with a friend, and he said, "You know, you may have left Africa, but Africa never left you." I thought that was he was right. I feel that very deeply, but it was a very powerful thing to say. And this is someone I haven't seen a lot of, but he could tell. He could tell. And you know, I think that sense of crossing over into another culture and really feeling, you know, how deeply you may fit in, although you're still an American, I mean, that was really very special. And at the time of my life when I did that, and I think not only changed my outlook on the world in lots of ways, but it helped to shape my career. It got me interested in the economic development process, in being a part of that, in contributing in Kenya and ultimately a lot of other countries. But that's where it all started, and Peace Corps really set me down that path. I feel very lucky. When I was a newly returned volunteer, I was in that state of flux that almost everybody experiences. And I was thinking about going back to graduate school. And I looked at a couple of options, and I finally settled on anthropology because I felt that it was going to sustain my curiosity about the world around me, which had really really grown during my Peace Corps time. So I went in to talk to Columbia University's Applied Anthropology program, and I'm sure I asked them, well, now if I do my field work, can I go back to Kenya and do the field work there? They said, well, of course, that all depends. You know, you have to pass a few courses. You know, if you're going to do a dissertation, you know, we have to bless your project thesis. And I said, sure, I understand, but I'm going to go back to Kenya because there's more there for me to see and more for me to learn. So I was able to go back in the mid-70s and spent an additional almost 4 years, 2 years doing field research, 2 years living in Nairobi on a project for the UN, and then probably with the same mindset. My wife and I moved back to the States, and I thought, I'm just going to look for a job where they let me go to Kenya every year, if there is such a one. And I said, obviously that's not the only thing I would do. So I was lucky. I made a connection with some people at a small consulting firm, very small then, called DAI. I think they probably had 10 or 12 people in the firm. And my background with the anthropology and East Africa and Swahili, it's a bit exotic, but they said that's something we don't have, we'd like to have. And within a few months, I was back in Kenya working on a study. And then I don't want to say that I connived, but I just arranged every year. If there was work in Kenya, I would be usually on the team to do it, or I'd stop on the way somewhere else and just make sure I connected with people and places when I could who were important. And what's extraordinary now is that people from the families whom I met 40 years ago, they're spread out around the world. And some of them, their children are in the States. Some of my students have children in the States. So the network has just branched out in lots of interesting directions. Many of the Kenyans whom I knew at the time I was a Peace Corps volunteer. Some of them, at least, if they grow enough tea, have the income and they come to the States to connect with their family. So the circle has really closed in an interesting way, and I feel that I'm inside a very happy circle.
And I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya as a secondary school teacher, and I also in 1969, 1970. Because I am a medical technologist, I had an opportunity to do medical safaris and work with medical safaris being every Friday going off into the far bush to do well baby and prenatal clinics with a nurse who was a Maryknoll nun. And out of this, I got to know I'm trying to think, a dispenser was what he was called. His name was Obadiah, and he had this clinic with absolutely nothing except gentian violet. And when I left him my Navy Manual of Parasitology as a gift because it was extremely good, and he did have a small microscope. And so 26 years later, we went back to Kenya, and this is going to make me cry. And we visited him at his clinic. And when he realized who we were, because we hadn't seen him for a long, long time, he shouted to a young man, "Bring the book, bring the book." And this young man came with the tattered Navy parasitology manual, which they had been using for 26 years. And it was one of their few references, and it made me very, very happy that I had parted with it, because it was obviously far more important to them than it could have ever been to me. Thank you.
Jim Beverwick. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, 1969 through 1970. One of our former students, we were teachers, secondary school teachers in the bush on the Tanzanian border. 30 years after we had left Kenya, got in touch with us here in the States. He was a bush baby, didn't have anything, and he had become a very important person with the United Nations. And he came out and spent some time with us here in New Mexico, reconnected. He was one of the first to interview Nelson Mandela after he got out of prison on Robben Island. gave us a wonderful photograph. So it was a deeply moving experience. He was a great student, and at the age of 14, 15, and now he's a grown man doing good work.
Pete Petkus. I was in Kenya from the summer of '69 till the fall of '71. I was stationed just a little ways from Turbo, which was about 30 miles from the Uganda border, and I was an animal husbandry officer.
My name is Alan Warnicki, and I was in the Peace Corps in Kenya between 1969 and 1971. I worked for the Ministry of Agriculture, and I was based in Nairobi working for the director of the Animal Husbandry Division of the Ministry of Agriculture, although I would sometimes get out to the rural areas where we were basically working with farmers trying to improve livestock production. That's pretty much what I did.